Farming and Wildlife Officer at the Forest of Bowland AONB. And when I joined, it's finished now. When I joined as looking after the meadow restoration project, which is called Haytime. And as we continued with that project after the first couple of years, it became apparent that we were getting lots of questions and lots of people wanted to know um, how to scale down meadow restoration. So instead of it being field scale on farm, which is how we started, how could people reproduce that same restoration work, but in their own garden or within their own community. And so the Networks for Nectar project was born. And the aims of that project, in addition to the field scale meadow work, was to create stepping stones of nectar-rich grassland and mini meadows, excuse me. And one of the reasons that this work is so important is because our meadows, whilst they can support vast numbers of invertebrates, they're really quite isolated from each other. And what's so important is to have these stepping stones or feeding stations, nesting stations, places in between the meadows that the invertebrates can use, and not just invertebrates, but biodiversity in general. So this work is really, really important. That's the first thing I want to say. So thank you for coming along and hopefully helping out. So yeah, to encourage the planting and management of high nectar value plants, and this can be in the wider countryside, within the communities, or within your own garden, for us to be able to help people, and but also to involve everybody. And we do a lot of work with schools as well, which has been great. And so that we've been doing, we're working in several different ways, adding in species to existing grassland. So if you've got a lawn, you don't have to take up your lawn and start again. There's things that you can do and ways that you can work to add in more flowering species to existing grasslands. But you can start from bare ground, and I'll show you a couple of examples of those in a minute. To use seed, pluck plants, but also to think about how important trees and shrubs are as well. Willow, and Erica might mention willow, very important for bumblebees. And we were providing bug houses as well. But they're great things to make yourself as well. So over the 18 months of this project, we created 25 sites, as well as some flagship sites I'll show you in a minute. And we have this schools project called Wildflowers into the Meadows, where pupils from 4 local primary schools were able to spend whole days out in meadows doing all kinds of things, even just lying and rolling around and just enjoying being outside. As well as counting bees and flowers and doing arts projects. So yeah, maths projects, all kinds of stuff. So that, as well as then growing on plug plants and planting them out into the meadows. We worked with all different, not just members of the public, but well, in lots of different scenarios, and held a series of public events as well. That's my, thank you very much. Cup of tea just arrived. So I wanted to show you just a couple of examples. So this is Chipping, for those of you know, lovely little village in the Forest of Bowland, has a community area, and what they wanted to do, the Chipping in Bloom group wanted to produce some wildflower areas. On the left is where we started, so this is from bare ground. On the right is 3 months later, so you can see the poppies and the white ones. My brain's gone. I'll come back to what species they are. So this is a cornfield mix we've got here on the right-hand side. So these are the wildflowers that would have accompanied arable crops. But as farming methods have intensified, and the methods have changed, then these are the type of species which are now absent from arable ground, but really important for pollinators. These are all annual species, which means that they grow from seed every year. So that's why you've got the before and the after from the same season. So produce this beautiful display during the summer months, and then later in September, the local there was children from school there. You can spot a couple of cubs in there as well. They went through and they were collecting the seed from where the plants had flowered and set seed, and you can see them in the little bags. They're collecting the seed. Then that site was cut and cleared and turned over again to make the bare ground. You can see on the right hand side, that's the following spring. And then the children came back and spread the seed again. So this is a really important point. With cornfield annuals, they need to be sown every year into ground that's been turned over. So, excuse me. So in the same area of chipping and bloom, on the left-hand side, we've got an area of meadow that we sowed into existing grassland. And those are mainly, although they're a combination of annual plants that have to grow from seed every year, but also perennials. You can see the oxeye daisies there, and the pink is knapweed. They're both perennial plants. So the same plants grow up again each year. And on the right-hand side, you can see what it looks like. That was October time, I believe. And so it's been cut and cleared. And whilst you can just see the outline, because we'd created it within an old bed, you cut and clear, but then just graze, or most probably cut and keep it close to the ground through the winter, and then it will grow up again the following year. So two quite different ways of producing a lovely display of nectar-rich plants. Another case study that we looked at was at the Stirk House Hotel, and the reason I put this one in is because whilst we had a small area of meadow at Stirk House, we also put in a fruit orchard, a soft fruit orchard, a buddleia collection, and a wetland plant collection. And this meant that, and an amazing bug hotel, this meant that there were lots of different types of plants which were really good for invertebrates, pollinators, and went right through from the early spring with the fruit blossom right through to later on. So that's another thing to think about, is that from a pollinator perspective, it's about having pollen and nectar available for as long as possible through the season. So that's just a little run through of how come the Forest of Bowland have been working on nectar patches and mini meadows. I'm going to pass you over now to Erica. So Erica lives and works up in the Loon Valley, and started working with the AONB, I think in 2014, as part of the Networks for Nectar project, and has been really, really inspirational, and has worked really hard with people within the community where she lives to produce a network of networks for nectar, a proper network.
And I volunteer on this little project called Community Pollinator Patches. And from that, it's developed into something a little bit bigger, and we have just set up a community meadow project called Hermitage Field Community Meadow, and you'll be hearing a little bit more about that soon. Just before I go any further, I would just like to say that the flowers on the left are our native wildflowers. You can see there's lots of yellow rattle in there, which we plant to suppress the grass. And those are the flowers that grow naturally in this area. And so that's what you want to aim to plant. They're perennials, they come up every year, they are fairly cheap to produce, and you get tons of seed from them if you have a little pollinator patch. The patch on the right is billed as being wildflowers. They're wild somewhere. They may look great in California or on the Western Cape, but please avoid, if you're going to do this work, putting in a mix like that unless it's in your own garden or a park or somewhere where you're not interfering with the native species. Always go for the native plants, because not only do they produce lots of pollen and nectar for our pollinators, they also are the larval food plants of many butterflies and moths, and they produce a lot of habitat, a lot of seed for birds and small mammals. So it's a fantastic mix to plant. Yellow rattle, you'll probably hear about that quite a lot in today's presentations. This is a parasite on grass, and if you're planting into existing grassland, it's almost imperative that you put it in. Something that's not quite as strong is eyebright, and you will see that in a lot of meadows. So if you can get a source of rattle or eyebright, then please do get it in. This is a little patch, and this is how I started. Be warned, it gets addictive. So this is a little patch in my village that I walked past and for years and just thought, what a mess. And eventually I approached somebody from Bowland to see if we could do something about it. We stripped off this site completely because it was amenity grassland. It'd been an old station yard. So we put a cornfield annual mix on, and this is it, as Sarah said, 3 months later. It's the same, as a very similar mix, absolutely full of colour and humming with pollinators, and it really got the community engaged. It's about 10 by 10 metres square, close up, but at the same time that we put on this annual mix, we also underplanted it with a perennial mix. So first we spread the annual, and then straight away we put the perennial on top of it. The reason we do it that way around is you need to see that the annual is evenly distributed, and the perennial you can always fill in the gaps later. So this little site really engaged the community. This is it the following year, much later in the season. It was a beautiful mix. You can see it's full of wildflowers and grasses. And if you buy a commercial seed mix, it's 80% grasses and 20% seed. But you can always skew that a little bit by collecting some of your own seed, and we do that quite a lot. So if you're thinking about it, I just put a few points for you to consider. And the first thing, and probably the most important, is to select a sunny site. Because if you're working in a sunny site, you almost have a 100% chance of success. If your site is shaded and dark, then consider, instead of planting a pollinator patch, go for more spring-like plants where the tree cover is not so strong. You need to seek landowners' permission, consider the access and safety of your volunteers working, and how's the site used currently. For example, if it's a bridle way, it's not going to be a good pollinator site. Make sure that people can see it. Does it have disabled access so everybody can enjoy it? Consider the long-term management of it, and this is probably one of the most crucial things. So think about how it's going to be cut, how you're going to remove and dispose of the cuttings because they need to come off, or your pollinator site will become too rank. Engage the community and volunteers. So think scouts, schools, church groups, and we went to a rehabilitation centre for recovering addicts, and they did loads of fantastic work with us. We just engaged loads and loads of members of the community in lovely ways. Consider insurance for volunteers, not only to protect them, but also to protect yourself. If you know somebody who could survey the site, then certainly get that done. It's a nice thing to do. Seek funding. There's all different sources of funding, and don't forget you can also raise your own funds as well. And finally, plant native wildflowers and grasses from a local source or use a reputable supplier. I think that's really important and we can't stress it enough. Okay, so we started on this little patch here and we've had a little bit of expansion. So the next year we did another site here, the Catholic Church, and then the following year we did a site here. BT engaged with us here. You'll see another site that we've done here. So gradually we have expanded this area to create a really useful area of land for pollinators and for wildlife. If you can have a hedge, get a hedge in. There's fantastic sources of hedging. And this is some of the ways we've worked with our volunteers, our bug hotels. They've planted plug plants. They all come out. Some of them have joined us, even though they're quite young, for 5 years running. We always serve cakes, and I think that's the trick. We get young and old from our growing plug plants is a really cheap and effective way to increase your areas and put more diversity into your sites. Really cheap to do. Lots of people can be engaged in it. And I wanted to show you this site because actually this site, when it was like this, it got quite a bit of criticism for being untidy. And I've been on holiday and I saw this criticism on social media. So I want to tell you that not everybody views this work in the same way as you do. So it's really important to engage with the community. So that's our little site behind, the first one that you saw. This is about 40 meters. This is the second one. And when we had this complaint, I went and took these 2 photographs, and that's what they thought was untidy. An absolute pollinator heaven. This is a lovely site in a neighbouring village. It's on a roadside verge, and normally I wouldn't touch a roadside verge with a barge pole for all sorts of reasons. And the main one is it's mainly, they're often ancient grassland, and there's fantastic things growing in them without you doing anything to it. But this one had been part of a development, and they'd put amenity grass down. We had £50 to plant this site, and somebody from the village came and stripped it for us. A farmer let us put the clippings into his field, and then he ploughed it in. And it's been lovely. It's been like this year on year. Sorry, that's another side of it. Now, this is another way that we kind of expanded, and this was the Millennium Cycleway runs along here. It's a national cycleway, and the council had done some work here and had used it as a yard for all their materials. So we just asked as a community if instead of having amenity grassland, which was going to be cut many times a year, could they put in a wildflower mix? And at the same time, they agreed. At the same time, they put a hedge in with a few lovely native trees, some flowering cherry, some rowan, and it's become a really beautiful area. Last year, somebody from Butterfly Conservation was surveying it when the painted ladies were there, and there was 150 painted ladies in 15 minutes. And you can see it's really appreciated by the red-tailed bumblebees. That's another corner of the site which wasn't done by the council, and so the community did that, and that was the picture that you saw of all working earlier on. And that was funded by Bowland AONB and Grow Wild. But we did these pollinator areas, and then we started to think, well, what else could we do? And we've done quite a lot of engaging with our council, Lancaster City Council, as volunteers, encouraging them to change the management on some of their sites. And these are bee orchids. And I was just looking at a site one day and saw these tiny plants coming through, and I thought they were bee orchids, but I checked with the professionals and they said yes they are. So I contacted the council and said, please, could you change the management? They've changed the management over about 2 acres of that site now, and it's a really fantastic area. Of course, it could be used as a donor site for other, it's in a limestone area, so it could be used for donor sites in other areas. This is a gorgeous site with marsh orchids, and then this was a site that had been a little bit neglected, and we started to get the council to change the cutting regime, and I think this year we had 500 common spotted orchids on there. This is just an idea that you can do at home, you know, leave your grass uncut for longer, join in no-mow May. If it's in sunshine, it's even better. So think of ways that you can change this in your local park or in your home, or encourage others to do it as well. And that's the orchids that we've been managing on that lovely verge. This is a local churchyard, and actually, apart from giving them a little bit of advice, the management of this is nothing to do with me, and I can't take any credit for it, unfortunately. But it's churchyards are often on ancient pasture, and they often planted really interesting wildflowers to ward off evil spirits. And this is managed under the God's Acres scheme, and it's a fabulous area that people can obviously get married in, go and sit in and have quiet reflection. There's areas of grass that are left long and are beautiful. There's areas of short grass. And this is one of the plants, Bethany, that was planted to ward off evil spirits and ghosts with harebells. It's absolutely stunning. And we do use it as a seed source as well. And I wanted to put this in. This is just an ordinary verge where we live, but this year during lockdown, many of the verges didn't get cut. And this is an example, and you can just see with your own eyes what a fantastic pollinator source that is, especially for early pollen and nectar. The cuckoo flower, lady smock, is really the larval food plant for orange-tipped butterflies. So if you grow that on your dampy meadows and damp lawns, you'll definitely get the orange tips in. And then we worked with the meadow specialists at Bowland and Lancashire County Council to completely change the management of this site. And this is a site that has been leased to the Life for Life Memorial Woodlands. So they have planted all these memorial trees round, but this middle meadow was being cut 15 times a year. They were bringing all the cutting equipment from Oldham to Lancaster to cut it. And we just said, well, how about just not cutting it? And the interesting thing about this site, not only is it stunningly beautiful, but the Life for Life team now manage 37 of their 52 sites like this. So it's just had a massive expansion. They've just realised that cutting all that grassland was a waste of time and energy. So for this site, you can see it's got a lot of rattle in it. We had a seed donation from Bowland AONB, and we had donations from the Coronation Meadow, Bell Sykes, and local meadow people also donated us some seed as well. And it's absolutely stunning. Superb asset for the community. This was it a few weeks before it got cut. We've done fantastic things with the scouts. They've grown plug plants and planted them. They've done balsam bashes on the fringes of it. It's been a lovely, lovely project. This year in lockdown, we had some isolating plug planting to still keep going. And the whole site, instead of being cut by small machinery, is now cut by a contractor. It's a really effective way to manage the site. And for the first year ever, they used the hay from this site this year. Some of the plants that grow on there. And also with the Bowland AONB team, there's been some bumblebee monitoring going on. Somebody from Butterfly Conservation has very kindly come and done some butterfly monitoring for us. And that has led to us being able to take over as a charity, the Hermitage Field Community Meadow, 5 acres of this beautiful field, and we hope to do the same thing. So the meadow that you've just seen is back here, and it floods, by the way. It floods about 4 times a year, and this is a much higher meadow, and we're hoping to have the same results on that lovely space as well. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to stop sharing now.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Erica.
You're welcome.
What you want to think about is actually what you want to achieve, what do you want to see, and what is most suitable for where you are. So, as Erica said, for a small space, you can skew your mix and maybe include it so you've just got mainly flowers rather than grasses and flowers, and then you're having a higher rate of pollinator source plants for your local pollinators. And if you've got a larger area, then do you want to manage it more as a meadow with the grass mix in with it? But of course, this also depends on a lot of other things that we've discussed. So things to think about when you, well, you may already have your site, you might not have a choice of your site, but you can adapt the species and your methods to suit your site, or you can choose your site to what you actually want to achieve at the end. So the main thing is to think about the size of the area that you can actually manage. Erica talked about long-term management, and that's quite important to maintain. It's very easily to lose what you've put your hard-earned cash and time and effort into. And also you think about your soil type. Is it a really wet area? Is it really high pH? Is it low pH? That would probably determine what sort of seed and plants that you use. Also, you might have really high nutrients, so you might have to think about what sort of wildlife plants would grow in high nutrients. There are some that can tolerate that, and we can send you some details of those as well. You can get a pH test kit at your local garden centre, and just kind of gathering the facts about what you've actually got there. And like Erica said, leave it to grow and see what species you've already got in there as well. And also, ideally, you want a sunny and open space, because most wildflowers are meadow species, so they're used to the open spaces of the meadows. But it's also not the end of the world if you haven't got a sunny open space, because there are shade tolerant species that pollinators use as well. Not all hedges are in a sunny spot, some are shaded by trees, and they're a really good source of pollen and nectar. And also think about your own resources. How much time and labour have you got? And obviously it's not an inexpensive thing to undertake. And then again, the long-term management, can you carry on looking after a large area going forward? So as you've gathered, there are lots of different ways of starting off your pollinator patch. Anything from just natural progression, just changing your management, seeing what comes up. That's obviously the least expensive and the least time consuming, because you're probably reducing the work. If you just want to turn a little patch of your lawn into a nectar patch, then just leave it to grow and mow it once a year or twice a year instead of 10 times a year. And then you might want to sort of middle ground, just cut your grass really short, add some flood plants, create some bare patches, add a bit of seed, and obviously again mowing less. And then the extreme of completely replacing the vegetation, and sowing a fresh mix on top of that. But whatever you're doing, the first thing you need to do is cut and remove your existing vegetation, whether it's grass, scrub, brush. It does help to reduce the nutrients, to clear off the cuttings, and it also, if you are going to clear the ground, then it does make it easier to clear the ground. So you need to create bare ground for the seed to make contact with the soil to enable it to germinate. Obviously, like we said, the extreme is removing the topsoil, so this can be done either with a turf cutter. If you're lucky enough to have machinery, you can just scrape back the topsoil with the digger, and then you're down to sort of the subsoil, which has lower nutrients. The advantage of that is also you take away a lot of the weeds in the seed bed and the roots, but also you are going to remove any seeds in the seed bank in the topsoil as well. So if you're not doing that, the other way to create bare ground is either to chain harrow if it's a larger area, or if it's just a patch in your lawn or some amenity grass, you can just use a scarifier or rake it really hard. You're just kind of you're aiming to achieve just at least 50% bare soil, so that your seeds are actually going to make contact into that ground and enable them to germinate. So, but of course, you might not have the means to do any of those things, in which case you can just scrape a little area clear in your lawn or your grass and just sprinkle some seeds in there and heal them in, or plant a few plug plants within your grass and just let it do its own thing a little bit slower but more naturally. And then we come on to actually choosing your seed. So you might, as we've said, it's really, really important to choose UK native species, but it's also important to kind of find out about what grows naturally in your area as well. You know, have a walk along, if you're lucky enough to be in the countryside, just have a look what's growing in the meadows, in the hedgerows. You might want to collect your own seed, or you might want to buy some from a reputable company that will sell you. Some companies can sell seed mixes to suit not only your soil but to your area, to your weather, and it's another reason for buying local seed, local provenance seed, is because they are genetically evolved to survive better in that climate. Because if you're going to sell seed in Scotland, then you don't want some seed that's come from plants that have evolved down on the south coast, because they really won't fare very well. And then also you need to make sure your seed is appropriate for your soil type or the pH. And as Erica said, it's really important to include perennials and yellow rattle and or eyebright into your mix, as well as the annuals, because that gives you continuation not only through the season but going forward in following years as well. And you can always add your cornflower or your annual mixes back into the patch at the beginning of every year, but those perennials will be there year after year. A little bit about yellow rattle, that's a hemiparasitic plant, which if you're growing in just flowers, then it's not going to survive, because it actually needs grass species to thrive on. So that yellow rattle suppresses the grass growth, which is why we say it's a really key species into getting a hay meadow going in an existing grassland. So it's not as important if you're just going to have a solely floral patch. So if you're going for the meadow look and management, then you need a grass seeds in there. If you're just going for a small 2 meter square patch, then just flowers is probably okay for you. But we've got, if you wanted to collect your own seed in the countryside, well, actually there's one thing I haven't mentioned, is if you're in an urban setting, then it's not as important for it to be flowers that are local to your area. But if you are actually in the countryside, then you really do have to think about the responsibility of spreading non-local seeds into the countryside, especially if you're close to a triple SI meadow or BHS meadows, because you don't want to be introducing non-local species into those meadows. So we actually have some films that Sarah's done on seed collecting in the countryside. So I'm just going to unshare my screen, and so that Jane can, sorry, I'm going back. Stop share, there we go. So Jane can show you the film, the first film on collecting seed in the countryside.
Can everyone see that? Can you see that, Carol?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Collecting seed. We have an identification guide which shows 10 of the meadow species that we most want to put back into meadow restoration project. It shows pictures of the seed pods and the seed, so it can help when identifying the different seeds that you're collecting.
Is that okay, Carol, there?
Yeah, you can carry on doing a little bit more. Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah.
But really you just need a couple of pieces of equipment, some paper bags and a pencil. We always want to write down the species that we're collecting, the place that we're collecting them from, and the date that they were collected. Obviously we want to identify each particular species, so we just put one species in each bag and have a bag for each separate species. Very often you will be collecting seed from verges and the edges of meadows, and it's important to work out whether the seed that you have found is ready to collect. When the seed is ready, it will fall away from the plant quite easily and is likely to be a brown or red colour rather than a green colour. Some species that we collect have dandelion type clocks because they are normally dispersed by the wind. Pop them quickly upside down into your bag to make sure they don't fly away. When you're collecting seed, it's important to make sure that the seed you're collecting is viable and has been pollinated. Viable seeds are plump and round, shiny and brown. If the seeds that you're looking at are small and shriveled or flat, it probably means that those flowers were never pollinated and so you don't have viable seed. When you're collecting species such as this knapweed, the seed is right down in the bottom, so it's important to open up the seed head and check to see if the seed is viable or in fact that the seed is still there. When you find a patch that you want to collect seed from, make sure that you only ever take a maximum of 1/3 of the seed that you can see. Once you've collected several different species, each in a different bag, the next thing you need to do is take them home and get them air dried. We'll be looking at drying and storing seed in the next video.
Thanks, Jane.
No problem.
Thank you.
If I put my share.
Okay. So you can also, we've also got a really good source of where to buy species, and this is this website here, this Grow Wild UK. That's got a really good list and lots of really good advice on how to source local native wildflower seeds. And also you can ask any of the team here, or you can ask your local Lancashire, your local wildlife trust will help you. There's lots of advice out there. And out that's it. So the guide that we mentioned in that video there, you can buy from the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust shop. So the picture there on the left hand side is the seed guide. And then we also have Flowers and Grasses of the Hay Meadows, which tells you some of the species that you'll find in the Yorkshire Dales meadows, but also most of those species grow in the Bowland meadows as well. And then if you're out and about walking in Sladeburn, doing our hay meadow walks at the Coronation Meadows, we've produced a leaflet there that shows you some information and flowering times of species that grow in the Bowland hay meadows. So you can pick one of those up off Peter at the Belsykes farm. And another thing, just to point out the point that Sarah made in that video, so it's really important if you are collecting seed that you've got landowner permission, and also that you only take, you know, sort of a quarter of the seed that's available, really. And if you have a chance, is a tip that Erica gave me is, if you are collecting seed in the countryside, just heel some in where you're collecting at the same time as well, so that you're helping spread the seed in the location that you're collecting from. So we've got, before we go on to sowing your seed, we've got another video, just as somebody asked about earlier, about storing seed. So it will just show Sarah's video that we made for some tips on if you don't want to sow your seed immediately, if you want to save it for the following year.
That we've previously collected. The first thing we need to do once we've collected the seed out in the meadows is to dry the seed slowly. So we take it out of the bags and put it into dishes or trays. You keep the dish or the tray or whatever you're using in a cool, airy place out of direct sun. Once we've put the seed into the trays, I tend to put the trays back into the paper bags. This makes sure that we don't lose any of the seed that might escape through their explosive dispersal mechanisms. Once the seed has air dried for a couple of weeks, it's ready to use if you're going to plant it out or seed a meadow in that same season. If you want to store the seed and use it next year or maybe even the year after, then you need to continue the drying process from air dry down to 15% moisture. In order to do that, we use silica gel in an airtight box. So the seeds in the
Is that okay, Carol?
back in there.
Yeah, just going to say, just because it's quite a long video, we're going to send out the links to all these little video clips so that you can watch the full length of them after, but you get the gist of it there, giving you some really good instructions on how to store your seed, because you might want to sow them to grow as plug plants, you might want to keep some to sow next year to sorry, I'm just trying to share my screen at the same time. I can't talk and do things anymore, it seems. There we go. Yeah, so you might want to sow them the following year as well. So hopefully my laptop doesn't seem to want to work anymore. There we go. So you've collected your seed, you've stored it, you've dried it, and now the really, really exciting bit is actually getting out there and sowing your seed into your prepared ground, whichever method you've used for preparation. The best time for sowing wildflower seed is between September and November. You can sow it, they say, up until the winter solstice, which is usually the 21st of December or the 22nd. But if you're sowing it at this time of year, there's still a little bit of warmth in the soil, so you're still going to get some early germination. And also a lot of wildflower seeds need vernalization, which means that they need to have that freeze and thaw to trigger that germination. A dry still day, that obviously it's better for you if it's dry. The seeds don't mind whether it's wet or not, but it's just easier. You can see where you've sown the seed, and obviously if it's really windy, it's going to blow the seed all over the place, and that way you want it. You're aiming to get an even cover of your seed, as Erica said. So I find if you split it in half, and so walk sowing it in one direction and then so the other half walking in the opposite, at right angles to that. So you're sowing one way with half and then across the other way with the other half. That helps to get an even cover. You can mix it with some people have mixed it with kiln dried sand. It needs to be really dry and really fine sand. That just helps you to see, if you're sowing on bare earth, it just helps you to see where you've actually sown the seed. Although it's mainly with wildflower seed, it's quite obvious because, as you can see where we've collected our own, there's quite a bit. I think that was barn sweepings from Belsyke's farm. There's still a bit of hay in there, so you usually can see where you've sown. And then the seed, if you've bought seed, they will usually supply you with a sowing rate, but the average is about 5 grams to a square metre. And you can lightly tread it in. You're kind of replicating where the seed would fall from the hay, and then the cattle or the sheep would come along, and as they're grazing the aftermath, then they would tread those seed in. So that's, you're just aiming to replicate that. We don't usually roll our seed in, but just kind of lightly tread. So you might not want to sow all your seed at once. You might want to grow some plug plants from your seed, which is really, it gives you a really good head start with some of the perennials. But obviously they can sometimes take a year to grow in the pots as well. But it does help if you've got really slow germinating species. Some species don't germinate too well in the grassland and they do better as plugs. And also just to get a bit of a head start from slugs as well, which can be a bit of a pest with seedlings. So there is another video that we'll send you the link to of how to sow your seed into plug trays, but we're not going to show you that for now. If you're sowing your seed into the trays, it's the same principles as you're sowing into the ground. And then when you're planting the plug plants out, this is a site where we use some sheep's wool to protect some globe flowers from slugs, which seem to have done the trick. But you can actually buy compost. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word then. Compost. You can buy compost with sheep dags mixed into it, and that supposedly helps deter slugs as well. But we do have a film to show you now with some advice on how to plant your plug plants out. I need to stop sharing. Jane, you want to share the last film?
Yep.
Out that they've produced from their wildflower seed. The plants that we're looking at today, they were actually planted out as seed a year ago. So they don't look very big, but they don't grow very quickly. In order to make sure to know whether the plants are ready to be planted out or not, all you need to do is turn the cell or the pot upside down, and if you can see roots coming out, then the plants are ready to go out into the meadow. If you can't see any roots, then you just need to leave them be and check again in another 6 months' time. The plugs do take quite a long time to grow, so you just have to be patient. Today we're planting out in this small community meadow in Chipping, to give you an idea that meadow sites can be big and agricultural, but they can also be small, managed by volunteers in the community. We're planting out some plugs which have been grown in pots and others that have been grown in the plug cells. We've got 3 different species, and we're just showing you the technique for ensuring that the plugs are firmly planted in the ground. With gloves on, and a kneeling mat is useful as well. Just pop out the plants from the cells or upend them out of the pots. Dig a hole and then put the plant in, but you need to make sure there's really good contact between the roots at the bottom and the soil at the bottom of the hole. Don't be afraid to give it a really firm squidge down in, and then surround it with the soil that you've dug out of the hole, and then at the end just give it a firm pushing down with your toe. They're actually quite robust. So once they're firmly planted in the ground, it's just a case, if you've got the opportunity, to give them a good watering in. Planting in September is a really good idea. The soil is still warm and it gives the plugs a really good opportunity to get established before they start to grow properly the following spring. And you will see the benefits of your hard work in your meadow the summer after you've done your planting.
Thanks, Jane. So yeah, you might want to buy. You might not, but you know, if you haven't got the facilities to grow your own plug plants, you can actually buy plug plants in as well from a lot of the suppliers that sell the wildflower seeds. Some of them actually grow plug plants, so you can buy them in and skip a year and jump ahead and get your plug plants in your first year, which is quite useful. But for sourcing your plug plants, it's the same again for your seed. Make sure not only that the plug plants are grown in the UK, but that the seed that they've grown the plug plants from come from the UK, or you know, even better if you can get them from a local area. Where does my so yeah, it's important to know where the seed that they've grown the plug plants from comes from, is what I'm trying to say. And then we talked about management. So once you've got all your seed and your plug plants in, you've got a lovely summer to enjoy, watch what's coming up, what pollinators arrive in your patch. But if you planted some plug plants, and like this year in May, we had I mean, it was lovely, but weather, but if you've got plug plants or seedlings, that was a terrible time for the if you're just starting out. And if it is at all possible, if it's in your garden or a community, if you can get people to get out and just do a light watering, it really will help those seedlings get going. And then we talked about cutting. So if you can leave everything till they've set seed, that's wonderful. And if you've got a larger area, then you might need to get some machinery in to cut that. It might need strimming, or you can cut by scything. The aim is to just cut the crop. You're imitating a meadow management. So you're going to cut the crop, leave it to dry out, shake out some seed, and then remove what the remainder that's left on the ground. Or if you're lucky and you've got some local children or your own children, you can collect, like we saw in the earlier photos of Erica's and Sarah's, to get the kids out collecting the seed. And makes a really good project for them when they're off school, collecting the seed and storing it for next year, sowing annuals in spring or the perennials in winter, or growing your plug plants from that seed that you've grown from your own plants is really satisfying. And then if, like we said, keep the grass short over winter. You're just trying to replicate the animals coming and grazing the grass over winter, and then they shut up the meadows in early spring for the grass to grow. But obviously we want our flowers to grow, so you might need to cut it again sort of as the grass starts to grow, because the grass will come up before your seedlings. So you're trying to rule out the competition from the vigorous grasses, really. So that's the usual meadow management, mowing the meadow, so they pile it up to dry out, and they come along and turn it over, all the seed falls out, they take away the hay bales, and you're left with the nice short grass after that. So as I mentioned, we've put together some really useful resources with absolutely loads of information. So this is the website. We'll send out these links at the end. But as you can see there, we've got how to create a nectar patch. There's 11 different, they're either links to websites, links to documents that have been put together through various projects that we've had through the AONB and wider partnerships. There's an absolute you could spend hours and hours or weeks even looking at that website. There's so much information on that, and it is really detailed as well, so you can take out as little or as much as you want from that. And don't forget to record your visitors that you get on your wonderful Nectar patch. So there's lots of schemes, especially this year. Whilst we've been, that's been one of the really good outcomes of the pandemic and lockdown. Has been that there's been so many more citizen science recording schemes. So we've got the pollinator monitoring scheme. There's butterfly conservation schemes. In fact, I think my last slide, oh yes, I've done it, I've forgotten I've done this. So I've got iRecord is a brilliant app for recording wildlife. The Bee Wars is the one for the pollinator monitoring scheme. Bumblebee Conservation Trust, they've got 2 fantastic apps for identifying bumblebees. One of them they've just brought out, I think they brought it out last month, has actually got 3D, you can do 3D footage of that species of bumblebee actually flying around in your own house. It's quite amazing. And then Butterfly Conservation, they use iRecord, but they have their own app for recording butterflies as well. So there's no end to the recording you can do, and we can send out, we'll send out all these links afterwards. And then we have the one that the project that I get involved with is the bee walks, where we have volunteers that go out and monitor bumblebees in the hay meadows. So if you wanted to get involved in learning more about bumblebees and how they live their lives and what they pollinate, then hopefully we're going to have some more training in the spring, so you can learn about that project then and get involved if you want to. But that's it for now. Hopefully I've answered some of your questions in that presentation.